Hello and welcome to the Vulpine podcast episode 2. I am the commissioning editor here at Vulpine Press, and am delighted to be joined by a wonderful author of ours, Vanessa Pearse, author of Beneath the Image. Just a few notes before we begin. Episode 1 is available now on Spotify and iTunes and also on YouTube, as well as various other podcast hosting sites. So do check it out. That is with our wonderful horror writer Zach Finn, who was there to discuss his novel The Ancient Evil versus the Good Boy. But today I'm delighted to be talking to Vanessa about her wonderful book. Vanessa, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
For the benefit of viewers who haven't been acquainted with your work already, can you please give a brief synopsis of Beneath the Image?
Okay, well, I would see it as being, it's about people, real life situations, what happens, particularly midlife, I suppose. I'm very much aware that we go through a lot of change in midlife and a lot of self-doubt, and then there's menopause thrown into the mix. And also, I became very aware, funny enough, around the time I started writing about domestic abuse. Through writing, I actually met a number of people who had suffered domestic abuse. And then in my wider circle, both male and female who have suffered domestic abuse, we're inclined to think it's all women who suffer it. Men, it can be more coercive abuse and manipulation, but very much issues that I think we weren't talking about. And I felt compelled to write about those issues. And then menopause can have big effects on you physically and mentally. And I was very much aware of that myself when going through it, and really want women to start talking about it and men to get to know more about it. And then therefore we'll all be more compassionate and sympathetic and be better informed. So I've written very much a fictional story that I suppose compels you to read, hopefully, the stories. Therefore you end up being better informed.
I would say that your writing has a personal quality. At times it read like a memoir. I mean, I understand that it's not, but do you think there are parallels between you and the narrator, the character of Martha?
There would certainly be characteristics. It is absolutely fictional. Martha's backstory is fictional. Martha's experiences are fictional. But when I sit down to write, I do find myself getting into Martha mode. Funny enough, when I wrote the previous book, Deniable Memories, and this is actually a follow-on for it, it was based on my experiences in Sudan, which was life-changing for me, and if you like, coming of age for me, and found in terms of finding out who I am. But Martha's story is very different. But I found I was writing it in first person initially, and it was getting to like a memoir, which it wasn't, and I wanted it to be strictly fictional. But lots of things that are in it happened to me, really did happen to me. And I rewrote it in the third person in order to help me shift away from memoir and keep it fictional and get more into imaginary mode, if you want to call it that, fictional mode. Whereas the second book, Beneath the Image, is more strictly fictional insofar as the story is told. But obviously life's experiences influence you. And part of the book is menopause. I did have a pretty rough menopause, but at the same time, it's very much fictionalized and informed by other people's experiences as well as my own.
My experience as a reader is that Martha is at a point in her life, and without giving away any spoilers here to the listeners, she's at a point in her life where it's fair to say she feels powerless?
Yes, absolutely, has been disempowered by life, but she has built resilience because of things she's been through in her past. So powerless in one way, but then digs deep because of what she's been through before. And that's what I suppose we can choose to do. Resilience is the thing we talk about now a lot, but I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, one thing you can never recover from is a happy childhood. I just think it's a brilliant expression. I'm probably misquoting it, but the thing is that when we've had challenges and difficulties in our childhood, I think when we come through them, they can empower us to know that when we face adversity, that we can come through that.
Yes, and there seems to be a parallel in her adult life. So the character of Martha is friends with a lady called Celine, who is subject to some horrific domestic violence at the hands of a partner. And it seems to me that when Martha decides to help her out, she's on one part, she's being a very good friend. But I read into it that maybe she's looking for a mission. You know, she's sort of found her voice, and in a way, she is overcoming some of the abuse that she experienced in her own childhood. But she's able to play that out, maybe as a sort of role reversal later in life, by being the pillar of strength for Celine, who is very much in victim mode when we reach her in the book.
Sure, sure. And in Martha's story, you do meet characters who were key people to her to support her and made the difference in her life. And anytime any psychology books, anything I read, it's when people suffer and are suffering trauma, that it is usually one key person who believes in them and is there for them that can really make all the difference. And so I do really, believe that is what happened with Martha, and therefore Martha was willing and able to be there. But the other thing is that because Martha herself had suffered abuse, it allowed her to connect and be empathetic towards Celine. And, we all suffer different things and we often don't talk about them and we bury them and pretend they never happened. But actually, they can be an opportunity for us to connect with other people and to be more empathetic to other people. And that's how I see it anyway, that they can be opportunities in themselves.
Absolutely. And I would say Martha had a lot of things in her life that would benefit from maybe seeking help from a therapist at that point. And maybe her experiences were with Celine, along with some marital infidelity on her husband's part, was the catalyst for her to actually go to a counsellor, which ultimately led to her emboldening herself moving forward.
Sure, sure. But the other thing that helped to embolden her was her relationship with her mother. So she had some key people who believed in her too. But the self-doubt is often planted, if you like, in early life. And then when something happens that confirms, oh gosh, I really am not worthy. Because I've been brought up to believe I'm not worthy. And I get over it and I come out the other side of it. And then something happens and we go through that. We can revert to form, I suppose. And then we have to pull ourselves on and hopefully be stronger for it. I mean, I do really believe that a lot of what we face with self-awareness, if we can just say, what's going on for me? What am I feeling? I've done some philosophy courses and things, and I do find it has really helped when I can actually get myself to pause and ask myself what's going on.
And this comes back to the question of writing as a form of therapy. So the idea of retelling yourself the story, maybe not in a literary way, but things like journaling or just in your own head, sitting down, having a private moment and coming to terms with what has happened to you and potential solutions for any problems that you're currently facing. Would you agree with that writing is in itself a form of therapy? And I suppose if that's the case as a writer, how do you use it?
Absolutely. I think I used to do a lot of it when I was younger. I only got back to writing there 7 years ago. But years ago, I used to sit down and write things. And I did have, my husband actually said to me, oh gosh, Vanessa, you always write about negative things. But it took me years later when I went back to it, I realized that yes, I did, but that was how I processed them. He saw them as negative and perhaps I did, I don't know. But the point is, it's only years later that I realized, yeah, but they helped me to move on, when I wrote things down. And I would still often take pen to paper or take out the computer for lots of things. It is a way of working through things. And also, if I have an important, difficult thing to say, I might write it down and sit with it for a few days. And what I might say might end up completely different. But by getting anger or emotion out on the page, I will come back to what am I trying to achieve with what I'm trying to say, and say an awful lot less. So you can, roll back from the anger and roll back from the high emotion by writing it down.
You give yourself that psychological breathing space, in a sense.
Yes, yes. And I love when I manage to do it. And I will fully admit that sometimes I don't take the breath.
I think we all fall victim to that sometimes.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've mentioned here that you very artfully touch upon some what could be considered controversial subjects, but perhaps should be reframed as subjects we need to talk about. Do you have any advice for other writers who want to tackle similar themes, but don't necessarily know how to do that sensitively?
Oh gosh, there's always a fear of offending someone and sometimes in the very people who are suffering from the issues that you want to write about and bring out into the open. There's a fear that somebody will take issue, and there is absolutely possibility that somebody will take issue with some of what I've written. And I would say do some research, talk to people who are in those situations and see if your heart is in it, then go for it, and start maybe with your personal experiences and then be very careful to fictionalize them where you bring other people into it. I can absolutely say that the characters there are in my book are fictional, but they have been inspired by various things that people have told me. And some of those people that have read the book, they were absolutely given it very early on to see that they were comfortable with what I was saying. And it's not their story, it's all the people's story who suffer abuse. And it's not a book of suffering, as you know. There is joy in the book, there is pleasure, there is, the title itself is beneath the image. And I have to say, a friend of mine, the painting which is on the cover, which I think is fantastic, but there's joy in painting, and I think some of the image in that can really be quite uplifting.
Yes, and I suppose it's worthwhile mentioning that the character of Celine finds that solace in her art, and it's almost as if during her period of abuse she was robbed of that by her abuser, but in his absence she rediscovers it, and it is transformative for her.
Yes, yes. And I suppose I took up painting. I can't even remember how many years ago. I haven't painted in the last couple of years since the pandemic. Myself and a few friends used to meet to paint, and I used to go out somewhere to paint as well. So I did. When I painted twice a week, I was definitely I got comfortable with it. Now I know it'll take me a long time to get back to it if I do. But the thing about painting is, once I started doing art classes, I didn't look at the world the same after that. I didn't walk past a tree in all its majesty without taking a close look and what a tree looked like and how you might represent that in painting, and just lots of different things I started taking more note of and enjoying. Well, I mean, I always enjoyed nature, but I just at a different level. And so I find solace in painting. I find comfort in painting. As I say, I haven't done it, but that's partly because I've got more into writing. And writing is that sometimes we meet people and we judge them and we decided they're not nice people, but they just could be having a bad day. And when you start to realize what's going on in people's lives and people open up to you, you become more in tune with that. And writing allows me to explore those possibilities and look at the psychology that lies behind who people are and how they are and so on. So I enjoy that immensely.
Presumably there are things that can be expressed just because of the nature of the medium via writing that you can't express in a painting, say. But do you think the same is true in reverse? That there are things that you can express somehow with art that you can't really put into words?
There's such completely different mediums. It's like the difference between a novel and a poem. It's like a poem says so much and so little so often, in a very condensed. And you every time you go back to the poem, you might see something different in it. I think novels are often much more expressively what they are, if you like, because there's so much more room to say it. But that's not to say people won't have different interpretations. But art is very like that as well. Numerous different people can look at the same painting, and some people will get one thing out of it, some will get another. And, you know, I think also when you're feeling bright, you might paint brighter. You know, it can affect your mood, and the brush strokes can change hugely with your mood. So there's lots of things, you know, and even when I do write, I notice that my mood, I have to be careful to get into the zone, the mood of the character, because I just get it all wrong. if my own mood to reflect where the character is at.
It's great that you're able to express yourself via both mediums, though. If we could just take this back, from looking at your biography page, it seems that you've had an interesting backstory for a writer and artist in that you were an accountant for a long while. Could you tell us a bit about your entry into the arts?
Well, I didn't pursue what I wanted to in college. In reality, I didn't have the confidence. I could have got into psychology, and I didn't do psychology for various reasons, self-belief being a significant factor. And then I went and did a BCom with a view to working in HR. That's what I thought I'd end up in. And then in my last year in college, my father died, and we were thrown into a bit of a financial quandary. And I had done the interviews for what was then the big six. It's now reduced to 4, I think, accountancy firms. And I had 2 job offers. And I was doing them more as interview practice. I wasn't really intending, although I had a natural aptitude at accounting. So anyway, I wrote the letter with my grandfather on the day of my father's funeral to accept going into Pricewaterhouse. And I went to the bank and borrowed to finish college. And that got me on the path of accounting. And I'll be honest, I felt for the most part like a square peg in a round hole. I did perfectly fine at it. I advanced quite fast, you know, all of that sort of thing. But it isn't, you know, it isn't what I wanted. But when I got pregnant with our eldest, I knew I didn't want to stay working in that environment, because I wanted being a mother to be my priority. So I went out on my own, and accounting served me very well then. And I had lovely relationships with my own clients because it was on my terms. And I never lost a client. I did, as I had more kids, deliberately shed some clients, but I really enjoyed my clients, and it was kind of work I did, I enjoyed, and so on. So yeah, it served me well. It paid me well. And then after 30 years of accounting, I decided it was time to do something else. And I started dabbling in writing.
And what was the moment that you decided, I'm going to pick up the pen or open the laptop or whatever it was and begin?
I don't know if I'd say there was a moment, but there was a time when I just decided I was definitely going to give it a try. So I signed up for Wild Women's Writing course with Maggie Gibson in Bantry Literary Festival. And so it was all women, and Maggie Gibson was fantastic tutor. I don't know what she'd call her title she'd give herself, but she really made us feel safe. And we all expressed ourselves. We read out our work. I mean, felt very nervous the first time I read out my work, but we really came, you know, I could see people changing as a result of that experience in how they processed, as you said about writing being therapeutic, absolutely processed stuff. But she just encouraged you. She gave you guidance, but it always felt, you know, it didn't feel like anything critical at all. It just felt encouraging. And at that class, when I read out some of my stuff, people laughed, people cried when I read out. And so I said, okay, I'm getting a response here. That's, you know, I must be touching a note, you know.
And you do weave in a lot of humour into your work, I feel, despite the nature of the subject matter. Do you think that's important?
I do. And I don't think I'm brilliant at it, but people have said that they find it there. So I must manage to get it on to the page. I find that when we're dealing with difficult topics, it just helps us, doesn't it, to deal with them. I mean, it's a bit like At my father's funeral, my boyfriend ended up driving through a guard of honor of Girl Guides, and he nearly took them out.
Wow.
I mean, that sounds ridiculous, right? But he nearly missed the turn. So anyway, the point was that I still remember sitting in the front seat of the car and just bursting out laughing at the craziness of these little Girl Guides scattering. And the fact that he'd nearly taken them out. But the point I'm making is, isn't that just so true of situations? Like, how often in these emotive situations do we really want to laugh or do something very expressive, So yeah, and laughter is the thing that helps.
So I just wanted to pick up. It's something. It sparked in my memory there. There seems to be an innate difference in temperament between the character of Martha and her children, particularly Zara. I mean, it's alluded to that actually they're very similar, and that's why they clash. In the book, they clash quite a bit. But I think you really address these generational differences that are prevalent, perhaps even more so than ever before nowadays, through those two characters. And I wonder if you could maybe, do you have any comment on that? Is it that nowadays the generational difference between parents and children is wider than it ever has been before, and what do you think that the reason for that is? And just for some context for the listeners, so Zara is very politicized, at least with matters of climate change and so on, and it's almost like her mother is experiencing some real heartbreak and change in her life at the point of the infidelity. But her daughter seems incapable of properly understanding that, and she's fixating on a rubbish island in the Pacific Ocean or something. And that itself carried a bit of humour. It was a moment about the rubbish island that I thought this is quite comical almost, how she's missing the point.
Yes, yeah. There are a lot of issues in what you're saying. Things are changing in the world much faster than ever before. And parents are older when they're having kids as well. So we got two things happening that is making it more difficult to be in a child's head, if you like, a teenager's head in particular, because we're older having our children and the world things are changing so much faster. So those things are absolutely true. And the thing I would say to narrow that gap that we as parents need to do is we need to spend time with our children and have conversations with our children. We also need to watch some of what they're watching, encourage them to share stuff with us, even if we don't get it, share stuff, show us videos, show us TikTok, show us things like that, and I'm not great at all of that stuff, but I do make an effort. And I did originally sign up to Facebook because the kids were going on Facebook. Now it's passé for them. But all of those things that you try and stay tuned to those, you fail time and time again. You're just so don't get it. And they absolutely, when they're being polite, they don't roll their eyes, but they're doing it inside their heads. And I do actually try and get the kids to explain stuff to me, that the way things are changing, and how their view and what is their view and different things that we never had to face. And I think there's a lot of things that are very difficult for kids to process. It's not just difficult for us. And the other thing I've noticed in children is they often, and we probably were all like this, we were very black and white in our views. They seem to be, in different views of difficult topics, they're never this. And I think we're probably all that. I find the older I get, the more I'm trying to say to them, oh, Mac, it's not as simple as that. There's more complex issues than what appears right to you and feels transparent to you. And I said, the older I get, I'd be much slower now to say I never do X, Y, or Z, because I don't know. And so that's part of the thing. The other thing what you're saying about the difficulty with relationships, I do think in families often, mother and a daughter or a father and son, often the ones that clash are the ones that, funny enough, are most similar. I think that often is the case. And I do think as parents, it's for us to be aware of that and pull back from the clash. It's tricky, as I said to you in the moment, it can be tricky, but it is reality. It is the reality of it. And, you know, we have to keep going back and saying we're sorry or expressing ourselves. The children are trying to find their feet. Teenagers are trying to find their feet. You know, and at some point they think they have it sussed when they don't, but you can't turn around and say that. But we have to, you know, ultimately we're there to support them and to be there for them and give them confidence, and ultimately our job is to make them independent. But we have to accept that being a parent, there's nothing like your children for telling you what they think of you. And I think that I like that, actually. You know, mostly my kids are great and they do it, I have to say, with compassion and so on, but I really like that they do that. You know, that they remind me where I'm going wrong, even if I don't agree with them.
I think just touching upon the idea that you clash most with people who are similar to you as well. If they are telling you that you're doing something wrong, it's almost like an aspect, well, in a biological sense, it's quite literally an aspect of yourself telling yourself not to do something, which is going to come across more resistance.
Yeah, but I think one of the reasons that we clash with people who we're most similar to is often because we have the things that we care about are similar. So, in other words, I won't clash with my son over football because I know nothing about football and he knows loads about football. So, you know, I'd be more likely to clash with one of my daughters about how I have the kitchen arranged. I don't mean that in any mega way, but you know what I mean, because she might have very particular opinions as to how something should be in the kitchen, and I might have equally strong opinions, you know, and those are just minor examples. But the thing is, we clash often because we care about the same things. I think can be the case too.
There's something about that as well, isn't it? You when you're all living under the same roof with families, it's you stop seeing them as individuals. You become this kind of amorphous puddle of ideas and routine just sort of swimming around. And there's a moment in your book where I think you capture that so Patrick and Martha had obviously been separated. They had come back together for the purpose of a meal, to make amends in some way or to discuss business matters. And they see each other for the first time in a short while. And it's like seeing themselves with brand new eyes. Suddenly, Martha's seeing Patrick as a separate human being again. He looks different. And I wonder if there's something about that when you're almost spending all of your time with somebody, and particularly a romantic partner, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that they are a separate human being.
I haven't been there with my husband at all, because we've always, right from the get-go, I made sure we had our time. So we did have that. And so I'm very grateful to say that. But that's partly because I was aware of that possibility. So, but I do think, yes, there are plenty of situations where what happens to couples is it all becomes about the family and the business and the work and so on. And they forget that ultimately what started the whole family was the two of them as a couple. And that if they're not strong, it makes it difficult for the whole family to stay strong. And they're actually, you know, they're at the core of it. As I say, very little in life is black and white, but I do believe that as couples, we have to keep working on being couples. And, you know, just because you've loved somebody for 20 years or 30 years, it doesn't mean you still have to work on it. You can't take it for granted. You must be aware, well, find this, you have to be aware of the need to spend time together, to communicate with each other. At the core, for me, of a lot of things, I like you say about the relationships between parents and children and stuff, communication is in reality, for me, at the core of it, of what happens in life, good relationships.
Absolutely. Right. Well, on that point, it's been great to have a conversation today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on at the moment? Do you have a third book in mind?
I think I'm going to say I'm around 2/3 of the way through a third book, and it does continue Martha's story, and it is again moving on a little bit, and basically I'm writing about drugs because I'm very, very much aware that they're just so prevalent in society, that they're just everywhere. And, you walk down the streets of Dublin and you turn a corner, and you could walk down the streets of, we have a place in West Cork, in a village in West Cork, or a town in West Cork, and you will smell weed, everywhere you go. And I know from different things, different people told me, things got worse for some people during the pandemic, because instead of doing drugs out and about, they met up with some of their mates at home or in sheds or in different places where nobody was looking. There was no, and so they felt free to do it freely, and did it in reality more extensively, some of them. I'm not saying all did. And I did hear stories of drugs being delivered by drone.
Wow.
In Dublin. I don't know if that is true, but the thing is, I certainly see, hear, and smell enough to know that drugs are definitely an issue, and for our kids' generation. And I mean, our generation drank a lot, often, but nothing like the quantities that the younger generation drink. Drink was relatively much dearer when we were in college, and so on. And the THC content of weed has gone through the roof relative to what it was when I was in college. So all of those things are mega issues that we're not talking about enough. Again, there are things, but they are huge impacts on families. And I know families whom they've had mega impact on.
So we've talked about writing as therapy. I think there's a similar case to be made for writing as activism. And it seems that with what the topic of Beneath the Image, and also with this forthcoming book, it seems like you're kind of teetering on the edge of that, right?
I'm absolutely inspired to write for what I feel strongly about. And these are issues that I feel strongly about, I feel passionately about, and I think they matter, and I want people to talk about them. So, hopefully, as I say, and I gather from friends who read the book, that it compels you to keep reading. So in that regard, hopefully, the more we talk about it, the more we become aware, and hopefully the better we'll handle these issues.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vanessa. It's a brilliant book, everybody listening. I would advise you to pick up a copy of Beneath the Image. If you go to the Vulpine Press website, there's a link available there. Where else are you able to purchase your book, Vanessa?
Well, you can order it online, or you can order it. I do love to support independent bookshops. So if you can go into your local independent bookshop and they can order it for you through a UK supplier. And I'd love you to do that to support the independents. And I have to give a plug to Bridge Street Books in Wicklow, because they've been very supportive. So as I say, hopefully it should be widely available.
Any other high street chains?
Waterstones have also been supportive, so it's also listed there.
Fantastic. Right, so Vanessa, absolute pleasure speaking with you. And that concludes the episode 2 of the Vulpine podcast. Just a note to any authors out there, if you have a manuscript, you're currently looking at home for it, if you go onto the Vulpine Press website, click on the submissions page, why don't you get in touch? And who knows, maybe one day it'll be you sitting in Vanessa's chair. We'll be having a chat about your book. But thank you very much once again, Vanessa. And yeah, goodbye.